And this is my review of Nightmare of Eden, the fourth story of the 17th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Tom Baker as the fourth Doctor. Nightmare of Eden is the 107th story overall. It's 4 parts long and it's written by Bob Baker, minus Dave Martin. The reason for this is because they made an agreement at the end of the last season that they won't write together anymore. And I find that a bit of a shame because if Dave Martin wrote the story as well, I think some of the faults could have been avoided. So the plot for this story is as follows. Two spacecrafts fuse in a hyperspace collision. Fortunately, the Doctor, Romana, and K9 arrive to help. But when a crew member is found clawed by a ferocious animal, it seems there's something even more frightening stalking the corridors. The answer lies with zoologist Professor Trist, his CET projection machine, and a planet called Eden, the home to the ferocious mandrills. So that is the plot for Nightmare of Eden. In my opinion, I think Nightmare of Eden is a very, 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 very weird story. Some good ideas, but it was just weird as hell. Not enjoyable weird, just plain weird. I thought the production was very iffy, but good at the same time. I did like the trippy side effects, but at the same time, I think it was too trippy. Especially when the Doctor and Shaw were struggling in that area that they were in, and they were confronted by Mandrill. The sets were okay. I really like the entrance, the Empress spacecraft. It looked very much like a futuristic spaceship. The script was actually quite good, but obviously not enough to save the story, and the direction was actually done by Alan Bromley and Graham Williams. Bromley actually stormed off the set because of arguments with Tom Baker, and I think he was just difficult to work with, so Williams pretty much had to take over. There wasn't really any noticeable direction in the direction, but it was alright, but quite iffy at the same time. The plot was actually good, but the execution was way off, and the message of the story left a very sour taste. Literally, basically, Nightmare of Eden is just basically Doctor Who on drugs, literally. And they had the anti-drug message, which was pretty much abandoned halfway through, and they pretty much went for like a drug smuggling message, which doesn't really make as much sense. And I think doing a topic such as drug usage and drug struggling in a show like Doctor Who is just odd. And I think this is something you probably would have expected in Torchwood. And talking about drugs in Doctor Who is like talking about prostitution in the Teletubbies. And the reason why I think that the anti-drugs message left a very sour taste because I don't think it's actually aged well. Like, yes, even though like recreational drug use is pretty much accepted in today's society and was pretty much frowned upon back in the 70s. And the story pretty much treated Viraxorin as a drug like cocaine or something like that. I'm not saying cocaine is good to today's standards. It's still quite damaging and it has a lot of damage in communities. And it pretty much did say in the story that Viraxorin was actually caused a collapse in society in some planets. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm not saying you should use drugs. You shouldn't use drugs. I'm just saying that it is a bit of a weird message, and it was just handled very weirdly. And I understand what they were trying to do. I don't want to sound like a bit of a Karen, but I think if you're going to do a story about like anti-drug use, try and at least. They did actually show like the effects of the Vraxorin, but that was pretty much very much abandoned after one of the guys after Jet died from it. Or well, after Jet went cold turkey and tried to kill Romana, but that plot was pretty much abandoned as it should have been. But I think it was just a very weird balance between the drug usage message and the drug smuggling message, which was just. In terms of memorable moments, there weren't many. The cliffhangers were very weak, especially the part 3 cliffhanger. Especially cliffhanger. Actually, the cliffhangers parts 2 and 3 were quite weak, but part 2's cliffhanger was alright because the Doctor is pretty much accused of being a drug smuggler, and him and Romana pretty much escaped with the what's it called? The CET machine into Eden where the mandrills were and where Jet was. But yeah, but I did like what there was a moment that I did find quite cool was when, well, not cool, but it was very well acted, was when Jet was having withdrawal symptoms from the vaccine, and he tried to like ask Romana for it, and she was like, it was very much like a drug addict who was pretty much weaning off the drug and was trying to like ask the first person they see for the drugs, and they'd be like, "You're lying. Give me money. I want drugs. I want this. You must have more." Like, it was a very well acted scene, and Lala Wood, she looked petrified. I think she's a very good actress, and this scene was very well acted. But then obviously, I think one of the police officers came and rescued her, even though she was wanted by the police as well. But it was still a very well acted scene. I also like how the story is linked to the Space Pirates, another notorious story. Sorry, but the link was that Strut was working undercover for the Space Corps. He was working to try and figure out who the smuggler of the Viraxorian was. The acting in the story was good, but not enough to save the story, in my opinion. I think Tom Baker did a good job trying to make the story enjoyable, but I think you can tell he was quite annoyed with the story, and and obviously you can tell that he was quite frustrated, obviously because of the arguments he had with Alan Bromley. So yeah, the production of the story did pretty much have a toll on him and everyone else. But he didn't really have any memorable moments, but he did do a good job in some of this in this story. And I think there was one bit I liked towards the end when he was pretty much got into an unseen scuffle with the mandrels, which pretty much caused him to lose most of his coat because the mandrels pretty much tore into shreds. It was quite comedic, and it's a very comedic trope that you see with like some of these people getting into fights with like big monsters, and they lose like a bit of their clothing and stuff like that. Other than that, can't really remember anything memorable that the Doctor did in the story, other than the fact that he decides to randomly take off his coat trying to fix the CET or whatever it was he was doing in part 3. He removes his coat and scarf, and in the next scene he puts it back on. I thought that was just a bit weird. Lala Ward, I think she was okay in this. She was okay in the story, but I do feel like what she did wasn't enough to save the story. Plus, I think there was a bit in part 1 where she was looking at the CET and then she's randomly shot, but they didn't really exactly explain what the hell happened. I assume it had something to do with shot, but they never actually explained what happened. But as I mentioned before, I did like the scene where she almost got killed by Rig, who was high off his ass on Vaxorin and needed another fix. She does do a bit of heavy lifting, and when I say heavy lifting, she was pretty much running around with K9 or hiding from the space police and overhearing the conversation and stuff like that. We also have K9 in the story. He does good, and he does have some good moments, mostly consisting of him gunning down the mandrels, but at least he's outside the TARDIS for pretty much almost the entire story. And I like how K9 is pretty much factored into the plot from the very start to the very end, and is part in this season, apart from Destiny of the Daleks, because of the issues with the K9 prop and City of Death, and I'm assuming that had the same plot issue as well. So I think K9 was very well written in the story, and David Braley does a good job in voicing K9 here. And the side cast, we have Rig. He was the commanding officer of the Empress, but he crashed into Damon's ship Hecate. Thanks to Decker, his co-pilot slash coordinator. He was drugged by Trist by Viraxorin, which caused him to become very addicted to it, and he tried to kill Romana because he was going cold turkey, but he was shot and killed by one of the police officers. And as I said before, I think that scene was very well acted. And we also have Dilla. She, alongside Stott, was Trist's assistant, and during his expedition collecting the fauna and flora from different planets and galaxies, she doesn't really do very much in the story, other than she was just pretty much relegated to that area where Trist was and was talking to the Doctor and Trist and stuff like that. But when she found out there was Trist and Dimon that was smuggling the Vraxorin, she was shot and injured by Dimon, but she recovered. She doesn't really do anything in the story. And then we also have Seka. He was the coordinator of the Empress, and he was pretty much responsible for the Empress colliding with the Hecate because he was high on his horse on Vraxorin. And when he bumped into the Doctor who was looking for a second fix, he was attacked by a Mandra and he later died from his injuries. I must admit, when he was high from the Vraxorin, I thought it was quite funny, and I think because of the lack of acting for this guy, he just looked very as if the guy was high himself, but it was quite funny to say the least. We also had Stott, another one of Trist's assistants, and he worked alongside Della, and he and Della were lovers. But Stott was actually an undercover police officer working with the Space Corps to investigate the smuggling of Vraxorin. Trish shot and left shot and left stop for dead, which caused him to be a part of the continuous event transmitter, which I've been calling the CET for this review. And the CET became unstable when the Empress crashed into the Hecate. Stott was able to escape, the Mandrels were able to escape as well, and he helped the Doctor Romano in bringing Tristan Dimon to justice. I thought he was a very good character. I liked him, and he was pretty much one of the strongest side characters in the story. Lastly, we have the police officers Fisk and Costa. They were police officers sent from Azor to arrest the smugglers, and they think it was the Doctor because they tracked Vraxurin in his pocket, and they were looking for him for at least the second half of the story, I think. And they were looking for a promotion if they captured and killed the Doctor. The Doctor was able to clear his name, and they arrested the real culprit, Tristan Dimond. I thought they were okay characters, but I think they had their own motives. I think they were just there to at least beef up the plot a little bit. And finally, we have our villains. First off, we had the Mandrels. They were big monsters capable of fatally harming anyone that crossed their paths, including some of the passengers, just from the Empress, and Sekka, who was also high from the Vraxurin. And it was later revealed that they were made from Vraxurin so Triss can smuggle them. I personally didn't like the Mandrels. They looked very awful, and they were just there for the sake of having a monster in the story. And to be honest, I thought the Mandrels pretty much made no difference to the plot whatsoever. Aside from contributing to the part 1 cliffhanger, if we removed the Mandrels, they wouldn't have really made much difference to the story. No one would have noticed they were there, and they would have pretty much, the Nightmare of Eden would have continued as normal. And the two culprits of the drug smuggling. First off, we had Trist. He was a zoologist on an expedition to collect flora and fauna from many planets across the galaxies, and was assisted by Della and Stott. He used the CET to store his samples and turned to drug smuggling because of a galactic recession. He tried to frame the Doctor for being the smuggler, but obviously his plans failed and he was arrested by the space police. I personally didn't buy him as a villain because his motives weren't very clear in the story, because I thought he was too nice to be a villain, and even though he did have his own motives, but he was just a very dull villain, and he was just there. And we also had Dimond. He aided in the smuggling of the Vraxurin, and things became complicated when his ship, the Hecate, crashed into the Empress. He was arrested alongside his co-smuggler Trist, and he was a very dull villain. I didn't really like how the story just didn't go out of its way to explain why he worked with Trist and in smuggling the Vraxurin and his involvement. It was just very much a last-minute twist that made no sense whatsoever. I'd have personally had Della to be the co-smuggler, and not just Dimond. And I probably would have had Dimond get killed by a Mandrel or something. But I don't know. But I do think that Della and Triss could have pretty much betrayed Stott and left him for dead on Eden. It would have been a nice romantic deadly twist, so to speak. So the other thoughts of the story, other than the anti-drugs message, which was handled very badly, it wasn't just hammered down, it just got muddled up in the drug peddling, the drug smuggling message. But I think the main issue I found with the story was that it was just very dull. And I think the parts 1 and 2 really dragged, and to make things worse, the start of part 3 pretty much uses the last 2 minutes of part 2, which was obviously done for padding. And then obviously the Vraxurin storyline was just weird. I just didn't like it at all. So it was just, I mean, the idea was good, but then the execution just made the story just crap, for instance. And the Vraxurin was actually going to be called Zip, and there was another name that it was going to be called as well, but I've forgotten what it was. But Lala Ward told Greta Williams to change the name from Zip to Vraxurin because children would have found it appealing, which was a good call on her. Plus, there was just some parts in the story that made no sense, as why was Trish spiking the drinks? That motive made no sense at all. So to conclude, The Nightmare of Eden does have a decent script, but the production of the story ruined Nightmare of Eden along with the boring ass villains we had. So I give Nightmare of Eden a 5 out of 10, which is me being generous. Because I would have given it a lot lower if it wasn't for part 4, which did actually pick up the story just a little bit, but yeah, this story doesn't really work. My next review will be The Horns of Naimon, so be on the lookout for that. Thank you for watching this review. Please let me know what you think of this story, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and follow me on Twitter, Instagram if you haven't done so already, and the links for those are in the description. And I shall be seeing you later. Ta-ra.